Matt 6:19 to 24. Do not accumulate for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and devouring insect destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But accumulate for yourself treasures in heaven, where moth and devouring insect do not destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If then your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is diseased, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
Hello everyone, how are you tonight? It's good to be here with you. I'm Denise, in case you don't know me. We're going to have supper out in the courtyard afterwards, so if you do want to introduce yourself because you're new and you don't know me, then that'd be great. And of course, yeah.
It's the first of the month, we're going to GYG.
We are going to GYG, but we have a brief supper first.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes. Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Josie. I played cajon tonight, and last month's theme, because we're doing this big year thing, we've got a theme for every month. Last month's theme was be humble. And I realised I was really nervous about playing cajon because I don't really do that in public. And I was actually scared of making a mistake. But this is a place where it's okay to make a mistake. I hope that you feel like that too. It's okay to make a mistake. In fact, this is like totally off script. I remember when my youngest son was in kindergarten, his kindergarten teacher used to deliberately make mistakes on the board, just so that the kids could see that it's okay to make a mistake. Anyway, on to this month's theme, hold your possessions loosely. It's interesting, I had not talked to Shane about this sermon topic, but we went to Thailand as well, my oldest son and I. It was back in 2014, and we went to Thailand on this trip to meet our Compassion sponsor child. Compassion's this organisation, and you pay a certain amount of money each month, and that helps a child in various countries. So we went with a whole group of people from our church who also had sponsor children in the same region. It's the first time I'd ever been there. Before we went, we were required to read and discuss together this book. It's called When Helping Hurts: How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself. And that book, it was really influential. It changed the way that I understood poverty, and it changed the way that I responded to poverty. And I actually used some concepts out of this book when I spoke back in March about loving your neighbours, particularly the obvious but often misunderstood idea that when helping your neighbour hurts your neighbour, you're not actually helping your neighbour. And so we have to be careful in the way that we help our neighbour. A big question that this book explores is, what is poverty? And it's actually a really important question, because your answer to the question will determine how you respond to poverty. So if you see poverty as a lack of material resources, then you'll try to alleviate poverty by giving material resources, right? So your focus will be on giving food, building houses, giving money, material resources. If you see poverty as a lack of education, then you're going to try to alleviate poverty by educating those who are in poverty. And it's kind of that famous, you've all heard the line, give someone a fish and they'll eat for a day, teach someone how to fish and you'll feed them for a lifetime. You know, you can see that, right? If you see poverty as the result of people's personal sin, remember the prodigal son? He ended up feeding pigs. Was it because he made terrible choices, terrible life choices? So if you think that poverty is a result of personal sin, then you'll try to alleviate poverty by evangelising and discipling the poor. Do you see how important the question is? Do you see how important the answer to the question, what is poverty? Because it determines how you respond to people in poverty. The authors of When Helping Hurts, they believe I think that I should have made that white. I left it black. Anyway, I'm going to read it anyway. So the authors of this book that we read before we went off to Thailand, they believe that poverty is the result of relationships that do not work. Relationships that are not just. Relationships that are not for life, that are not harmonious, that are not enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom, peace, wholeness in all its meanings. I'll read that again. They believe that poverty is the result of relationships that do not work, that are not just, that are not for life, that are not harmonious or enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom. The authors of this book, they came to this conclusion by reflecting deeply on the story of Adam and Eve in the Eden Garden, and also through their knowledge and experience of community development. They kind of took those two things and put them together. They saw in the Eden story that the world is not as it should be. And I think that we can agree. We can look around and agree that the world is not as it should be. And it's not as it should be because of broken relationships. So, our relationship with our own self is broken. Our relationship with other people is often broken. Our relationship with the creation that we're part of, and our relationship with God. You can see all of those things in the Eden story. And if you think long and hard, it seems like all poverty is the result of one or more, or usually some mixture of all of these broken relationships. See, if I have no self-respect, if I don't regard myself of any worth, then I'm probably not going to take care of myself. I'm not going to prioritise my health or make good life choices because I don't have any concern, any regard for myself. I don't have a high regard for myself. It's a broken relationship with self. If I have no regard for other people, if I do not love my neighbour, I'll establish systems that are inequitable and unjust, or I'll turn a blind eye to those systems when I come across them. My neighbour will suffer because of my careless choices. If I have no regard for this creation that I'm part of, then I won't really care if it's damaged in order to fulfil my needs. I won't care about pollution, about endangered species, about climate change. I won't see the need to walk softly and gently on this land. And if I have no regard for God, if I neglect my connection to the divine, if I have no sense of the sacredness of life, I become hard, and my inner spirit shrivels and dies, and life has no meaning and no purpose beyond what I create for myself. Poverty is the result of relationships that do not work, that are not just, that are not for life, that are not harmonious or enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom in all its meanings. So I read that book, and then we went off to Thailand. Our first stop was a small Karen village nestled in among the forest up near the border of Myanmar. Has anyone been there? Yeah? The village was all of these small houses with dirt floors, or some of them were high up on stilts. There was this large grass clearing where the community could gather. And by chance, we arrived on a festival day and everyone was wearing their traditional dress, these coloured red skirts with hundreds of rows of beads covering the fabric. And the community was going to gather in the clearing at the end of the day to celebrate this festival and have a meal together. Anyway, our church group, we spent some time at this village. We met people, we talked with them through a translator, we ate lunch that was provided by the women of the village that Compassion had paid for. And then we were loaded into this bus, little mini bus, and we were driven 20 minutes away to an outlying part of the same community. And we arrived there and we climbed the ladder to enter the house that we'd come to visit. There's 12 of us. We're all crowded into this tiny little house on stilts. And we were greeted by the family that lived there, and various other neighbours just sort of kept on coming and going, wandering in and out. They sort of just randomly popped in to see the white people. The family who lived in the one-roomed house are a young couple with 2 young children, one a baby just a few months old. And they told us about their lives, again through a translator. We asked questions. We learned a lot in that hour or so that we were there. And then we piled back on the bus and we made the 20-minute trip back to this larger village. As we arrived, I looked out the window and I saw dozens of Karen people had gathered in this clearing in the fading light of the day. The bus parked and we climbed out and we started walking over. And as we got closer, I could see that they were dancing in this big circle, huge big circle, and they were moving with this simple rhythmic step and swaying hips. And I could hear the music that they were dancing to. There's a few drums made of wood and leather, and the different tones and rhythms, they all kind of mixed together into this most mesmerising and joyful music. And as we got closer, this little group of 12, they saw us and they waved us over to join them. And that's when this really weird thing happened to me that really took me by surprise. This feeling of, I can only describe it as longing, just swept over me, and I just ran towards this group of people in this clearing. This overwhelming desire to be part of this thing that was happening just gripped me. This celebration of community. I got there before anybody else in our group, and these elderly women with next to no teeth smiled at me and they ushered me into the circle. And they pointed to their feet and they indicated that I should do what they were doing. I should follow their steps. We'll skip over how uncoordinated I am and we'll just get to the bit where I sort of managed to figure out this very simple step. And I danced and I danced and I danced. And they laughed, and I laughed, and a few others from our group, they joined in this big circle too. And others either played with the little kids or just stood back and watched. And this dance, it seemed to go on and on and on. I think it was probably only 30 minutes, but it really felt like an eternity. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder and they told me it was time to get back on the bus. And that seemed like such a jarring and shocking idea to me, and everything in me rebelled against the idea of getting back on the bus and leaving this group of people, this thing that was happening. I didn't want to leave this community that I'd only just discovered. And so I ignored the tap on the shoulder. I don't know, those of you who know me will be thinking, well, that's weird. I usually do what I'm told to do. But I just ignored it for as long as I could. But everybody else went. They all got back on the bus. And they're all waiting for me because the bus couldn't go until I got on. And it just took this enormous act of will to stop and to trudge over to the bus. And even when I got there, I didn't want to get on. And then I just started to cry. And I felt really embarrassed about that. And I tried to stop, but I couldn't. And eventually I managed to get one foot up onto the first step of the bus, and then the other foot sort of reluctantly joined it and got onto the second step, and my feet just kept on going until I eventually found my way to my seat. And no one had any idea why I was just weeping. And I didn't either. And it was this really awkward bus trip back to the place where we were staying for the night. At the end of the trip, after visiting several communities, we had this debrief time, and lots of people in our group talked about how shocked they were at the poverty that they'd seen in Thailand, because we had seen a lot by then, how little people had to survive on. And all I could think of was the poverty that I see here in Australia. Because compared to the wealth of community that I'd observed and experienced in that 30 minutes of dancing, this society, my society, with all of its material wealth, it's really impoverished. And these people, they were so rich, so very, very rich. And I've been thinking about holding our possessions loosely this week, and, you know, should we just get rid of all our stuff? And I wondered if perhaps the secret to holding our possessions loosely is not to try really hard to loosen our grip because, well, this is something that we should do, but simply to realise the true worth of our possessions compared to this other type of wealth that we sometimes glimpse and that I'd seen in Thailand. In our Western society, we have a poverty of community that I didn't see in the Karen community in Thailand. They had material poverty, absolutely. And if we can support them through organisations like Compassion, then that is a wonderful thing to do. But those women with no teeth dancing together and inviting me in to their circle, that taught me more about poverty than I ever knew before. And ironically, it wasn't this material poverty that I saw in Thailand that made me so sad. It was the poverty of community that's here. We live in a country where people cling to their possessions as if they hold the power to make life fulfilling and meaningful. But many experience this poverty of relationship that is just soul-destroying. And I don't want to minimise the necessity of material resources. People with not enough food living in a wealthy relational community are still going to be hungry. And if we love our neighbour, then we'll be compelled to do something about that. So, our theme for this month is hold your possessions loosely. And there are some, oh, look, there it is. It was there after all. There are some challenges, as Jono mentioned, in our A Big Year Slack channel that if you're on Slack, you can go over and explore the theme and have a look at some of those challenges. If you're not on Slack, there's a link to those challenges in the newsletter as well. And most of those challenges have to do with our material possessions, how we can resist the marketing techniques of our consumer society that insist that we need this or we need that to make our lives fulfilling. Some of them just focus on how we can live more simply. But holding your possessions loosely is a whole lot easier when you understand that wealth is less about how much stuff you have and more about how much love you have. That wealth is the result of relationships that work. because you put in the work to those relationships. Relationships that are just, that are life-giving for all involved, that are harmonious and enjoyable. Wealth is the presence of shalom, a sense of peace and wholeness, of contentment, even in tough times. So, do not accumulate for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and devouring insect destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but accumulate for yourself treasures in heaven, where moth and devouring insect do not destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.